learners, and welcome to this class. Today we continue with the topic on land degradation, and in specific one of the land degradation problems, which is salinity, or the presence of salts in our soils. And some of the aspects we will look at, we will briefly introduce salt affected soils and what they are and how you distinguish them, the categories of salt affected soils, the causes of salinity, the causes of poor crop growth in saline soils, how to evaluate a soil as having a salinity problem, and some of the management strategies for combating salinization. So let us go back to the reality we know is that saline soils usually look like this. They have got a white top cover, or what we call as the whole horizon is covered by a white substance. This is what we refer to as the salt. And the salt is usually as a result of various cations and anions. Some of the cations include sodium, calcium, magnesium, and potassium, while some of the anions that result to salinization include chloride ions, sulfate ions, bicarbonate ions, carbonate ions, and nitrates. But what happens so that we can get this, what we are referring to as saline soils, is that during rain or irrigation, if leaching is absent, then the salts can be brought on the surface, as we can see here in those both pictures, as a result of capillary action. I do not want to remind you what is capillary action, as this is what you can recall this from your basic chemistry. But you need to know that it is what results to the bringing of the salts on the surface in the absence of leaching. There are three categories of salt affected soils. Number one are what we refer to as saline soils. Number two are what we call as sodic or alkali soils. The other number is what we call as the saline sodic soils. And we will look at each one of these so that we can be able to distinguish them. Number one, let us look at the saline soils. Saline soils have got the following physicochemical characteristics. They are exchangeable cations, or what we refer to as saturation of various ions, is more than 4. The pH of the soils is less than 8.5, meaning that they are not so much basic. The exchangeable sodium is less than 15. Then what are their physical characteristics? What do you see when you look at a saline soil? A saline soil has a good soil structure. It has good high infiltration capacity. Its soil aeration is good, and its color is usually white, as we have seen in the previous photos. But let us look at the difference between a saline and a sodic soil. Sodic soils are also known as black alkali soils, and their physicochemical characteristics usually is that their exchangeable cations is less than 4. Their pH is more than 8.5, and their exchangeable sodium is higher than 15. This is the opposite for saline soils. When you look at its characteristics, all of them except the exchangeable cation, including the exchangeable cation, the three characteristics, physicochemical characteristics, are the opposite of saline soils. Their physicochemical characteristics is that the soil structure is very poor. It is highly dispersed. Their infiltration rate and their soil aeration is also very poor, just as the opposite of the saline soils. Their color are like the saline soil, which is white. They are usually black. Then let us look at the saline sodic soils. Their physicochemical characteristics is that their exchangeable cation is usually higher than 4. Their pH is lower than 8.5, and their exchangeable sodium is higher than 15. Their physicochemical characteristics, just as the saline soils, is that their soil structure, their infiltration rate, and their aeration rate is good. However, their color is white. But what are the causes of either saline, sodic, or alkaline soils? The causes of salinity in this case are all the same for the three kinds of salinity in soils. One is the primary source of salts, which is rock weathering. Number two is the fluctuating of groundwater, or what we refer to as the water table. And this usually it deters the rate at which leaching occurs. Number three, in arid areas where they receive less rainfall and high evapotranspiration, then leaching of the soils is deterred, hence they are moved to the surface. And this is what we were referring to, the capillary action. Number four, in coastal areas, due to the inundation or the spread of water from the sea on land, inland, this is what results to salinization of the soils along the coast. That is, once there is high rainfall and sea levels rise, the waters tend to extend to dry land. And in this extension, since it is salty, they leave the salts there. Since when it is dry, the water levels return back to normal. Number five, irrigation of water containing high soluble salts or already saline water also leads to the problem of soil salinity. Number six is due to drainage restriction that reduces the permeability of soils. And we have seen in the past some of the effects that result to the drainage restrictions, such as the presence of crusting, the presence of hard pans, and compaction of the soils. These often prevent the leaching of salts, and therefore they tend to accumulate on the top layers of the soil or top horizons of the soil, leading to salinization. The presence of salinity in soils and water can affect plant growth, and this occurs in three ways. Number one, it can increase the osmotic pressure, the osmotic potential or osmotic pressure, and hence they reduce water availability for plants. And we will see in this class how this happens. Number two, it induces specific ions. That is, it increases the concentrations of some of the ions. Though they are important, they result to high concentrations, which can have an inhibitory effect or a toxic effect on biological metabolism in plants. Number three, it can diminish soil water permeability and soil aeration, and this has got serious effects on the soil structure. And once the soil structure is affected, so is the plant growth. But how is it that saline soils result to high osmotic pressure in soils? Number one is that the increase of osmotic pressure decreases water availability. Then, if water is not available, this means that the soil cannot hold water, and it makes the plant roots difficult to get water. That is, the plants spend a lot of energy to absorb water, and smaller quantities of energy is left for growth functions. Ultimately, the yield that we get is so small compared to if the soils were not saline. Number two is what we have referred as the specific ions effects. That is, some of the ions that are introduced when soils become saline, they become so much in high quantities, and they result to specific ion toxicity. For instance, the presence of sodium bicarbonate and soluble borates, it makes soils toxic. What does sodium bicarbonate and borate do? Number one, sodium bicarbonate usually leads to soils having a high concentration. And once the soils have got high concentrations, ions that are important, micronutrients that are important to the plant, such as phosphate, iron, zinc, and manganese, become unavailable. And this has got serious effects on the soil structure. And this makes the ability of plants to pull or to absorb or to take up water diminished. Then on the other hand, what do borates do? Borates at high concentration, they have a very toxic effect. And not all plants are able to tolerate the toxic effect of these ions. Consequently, the yields are affected. Another effect of salinity is it results to nutritional imbalance. And this nutritional imbalance results to a favoring of some of the ions and inhibits the presence of others. For example, these bicarbonate ions that result from the presence of sodium bicarbonate, once induced, they result to a deficiency in iron. Remember in your first assignment, you looked at the various deficiencies of micro and macronutrients and the way they portray themselves in plants or in soils. How do you distinguish a plant that has got iron deficiency from one that has got bicarbonate deficiency? However, in this case, we are saying the introduction of salts, for example, excess bicarbonates, induces an iron deficiency, and this has got consequences on the plant yields. Sodium, on the other hand, induces a calcium deficiency. Magnesium also induces a calcium deficiency, and these are displayed by the plant and the soil in the form of various characteristics that result to reduced yields. But how is it we distinguish a soil as saline or otherwise? Soils that are saline or do not have, to assess for soil salinity, especially during soil tests, we use four aspects. Number one is the percentage of water-soluble salts in the soil, or what we call as the exchangeable cation or the exchangeable sodium the exchangeable sodium in soils. Number two is the osmotic pressure of the soil solution. Number three is the exchangeable cation of the saturated soil extract. And number four is the concentration of water-soluble boron. When you look at these tables that I have presented here, various authors have devised ways in which they tell a soil is saline, alkali, sodic, or saline. For example, according to Hayward and Wadley in 1949, soils that are non-saline have got an EC of below 4, an ESP or what we call as the exchangeable sodium of less than 15, and a pH of less than 8.5. Soils that are alkaline have got an EC of less than 4, an ESP of more than 15, and a pH of more than 8.5. Alkali, or what we call as sodic saline soils, have got an EC or an exchangeable cation of more than 4, an ESP or exchangeable sodium of more than 15, and a pH of 8.5. Saline soils, on the other hand, have got an EC of greater than 4 and an ESP of less than 15 and 8.5 of less than 8.5 pH. When you look at these, we are calling as these are the various indicators we have said of how much you can know as well as saline. When you look at another study by Richards, it shows that the various electrical conductivity, the various changeable cation measures and their effects on the plant. For instance, if the exchangeable cation rate is between 0 to 2, the salinity effects are negligible. That is, they have no effect on plants and crop yields. However, on the other extreme, if they are more than 16, only a few of the crops can tolerate that high levels of salinity. When you look at another study here is that the EC of saturated soil extracts, you will see these EC levels and the response the plants have on them. Also remember we talked about the boron concentration. When you look at the boron concentration, the plant response, if it is less than 0.7 parts per billion, the plant is considered as safe. If it is between 0.7 and 1.5, the effect on the plant is marginal. However, if it is greater than 1.5 parts per million, it is unsafe. Please note the units we are talking about here in this case. Look at the units that have been used here for exchangeable exchangeable cation. The units that have been used here and the units that have been used in this case. But how is it that we manage or we reclaim soils that are saline? Number one, we can manually remove the excess salt by good quality water. That is, you can irrigate, or what we refer to as flushing. The same way you flush a toilet to remove the waste is the same way we are saying removal of excess soils using good quality water. That is a process known as flushing. Number two, drainage of soluble salts at the surface or the subsurface. And how does this occur? At the surface, you drain excess salts through, you drain the salts using excess runoff or use a lot of water compared to the normal. At the surface, subsurface, or what we are calling as below the surface, you need to lower the water table. And lowering the water table ensures that the processes of leaching, elevation, and eluviation occur as they are required. Another procedure we can use to reclaim or to correct soils that are saline is proper water management of cropping systems. And how is this? Remember, we said that one of the causes of salinity is improper irrigation systems. That is, those that encourage, especially in arid areas where there's a lot of evaporation or evapotranspiration, most of the water is taken up, and therefore the salts are also pulled up through the process of capillary action. Therefore, we need to ensure that we do not irrigate in excess, neither do we irrigate in deficiency. There must be a considerable level in which we irrigate. Remember that each specific crop has got specific water requirement. We need to note them before we plan on irrigation. These are some of the processes in what we call as integrated management practices in which we can use to reclaim salt affected soils. They could be biological, hydraulic, that is, they involve the manipulation of water or water systems. Biological, they involve the ensuring that the biological activity or the microbial activity is at par level. There are also what we call as physical and mechanical. These are what the physical actions you do on the soils to ensure that it is free of excess salts. There is also what we call as chemical, or what we use as chemical, what we call as soil conditioners, the use of fertilizers or soil amendments that are supposed to ensure that saline soils can be added another thing so that they can be neutralized. Other considerations on this, and this is on a bold aspect, is we have to consider the legal and environmental aspects, that is, those policies that have been put, or extension services, what agricultural services at community level have been used to ensure that salt affected soils are corrected. However, I want us to look at some of the management strategies of combating salinization, and one of them is soil management. And this you will see, we will keep on repeating them. Number one is soil management. And soil management includes the use of the correct fertilizers, the maximization of soil cover, and the use of deep-rooted crops. And what is the function of deep-rooted crops? Deep-rooted crops help in ensuring that the soil structure of plants are maintained, and they also ensure that the water table is lowered. There is also what we call as the minimum tillage, the use of fallows, and crop rotation. These we have seen in the past. The other strategy in which we can manage salinization is water management. By water management, I mean efficient irrigation of crops and choices of drainage. That is, are you going to use surface drainage, subsurface drainage, or bio drainage? And is there adequate disposal for the drained water, since If we drain water into other farms, then it means we will be introducing salinization in soils that are not affected by salts. Another last aspect in which we can use to combat soil salinization is the methods we use for removal of soluble. We have recognized a certain farm has got a salinity problem. What are the methods we use to remove the soluble salts? Some of the methods we do is that we ensure there is leaching, and this is why I said you have to ensure that the water table is much deeper so that the salts can be removed. We also have to grow deep-rooted crops so that they can ensure that water can pass through, water alongside the soluble salts can pass through and be drained. There is also what I have referred to as leaching, and there is also scrapping. Scrapping is the mechanical removal of the salts from the surface. But now the problem comes is when you use scrapping, where do you dispose the salt or the salt plus soil remains that you have scrapped off mechanically? Flushing, where do you drain away the topsoil with salts that you have flushed? Leaching. If you leach the soils down into the water table, won't you be introducing salt into fresh groundwater? Remember that groundwater is a common resource of water in the world, especially at these times when surface water has already been polluted. Therefore, you need to take these actions on combating soil salinization with much care because there are consequences. Thank you.